The case is about involuntary manslaughter, categorized under criminal negligence as the defendant omitted actions that would have otherwise attempted to prevent the victim's suicide. For the summary of the case, the victim, Conrad Roy, had an abusive childhood, which resulted in him becoming socially anxious and depressed, engaging in suicidal acts and found solace in his girlfriend Michelle Carter, whom he encountered on a family trip in Florida. Although they lived far apart, they communicated through texts and calls. The defendant, Michelle Carter, had once supported him through his mental illness, encouraging him to receive professional care, but her attitude changed and started thinking that the victim should kill himself, and started helping him find methods to end his life, and consequently led her to suggest him using carbon monoxide poisoning. However, when Roy hesitated and abandoned his attempt to suicide, Carter, over a phone call, instructed him to get back in and sequentially issued his death. Conrad Roy, the victim, was born on 12th of September in 1995, and Michelle Carter, the defendant, was born on 11th of August in 1996. The defendant and victim's first relationship was established in Florida in 2012. Roy's first attempt at suicide began in October 2012 after being physically and verbally abused by his father and grandfather. Until July 2014, Carter supported Roy throughout his mental illness, but her attitude changed to believing that he should die. In 13th of July 2014, Roy had committed suicide through carbon monoxide poisoning in his truck at a Kmart parking lot after Carter encouraged him to suicide. Under the Crimes Act 1900, Section 18, manslaughter is defined as murder shall be taken to have been committed where the act of the accused, or thing by him or her, omitted to be done, causing the death charged, was done or omitted with reckless indifference to human life, or, under the U.S. Code of Chapter 51, Section 1112, manslaughter is the unlawful killing of a human being without malice, and involuntary manslaughter is defined as in the commission of an unlawful act not amounting to a felony, or in the commission in an unlawful manner, or without due caution and circumspection of a lawful act which might produce death. And the offense of the defendant falls under the involuntary manslaughter resulting from omission an act or neglect or failure to take reasonable care. The defendant is Michelle Carter, born on 11th of August in 1996. In her research, it was discovered that Carter developed anorexia at age 11 and was put on the antidepressant Prozac at age 14. When the event occurred, Michelle Carter was aged 17 and also had a history of depression, and these circumstances act as mitigating factors to the juries when deciding her sentence. An expert witness explained that SSRI antidepressants, such as Prozac, can have severe adverse effect on the developing brain, and especially to Michelle Carter as she began taking them at age 14. The expert witness further stated that they specifically disrupt frontal lobe function, which controls judgment, impulse control, and weighing of future consequences. When considering mitigating factors, the defendant's age shouldn't be considered, as the defendant had full consciousness over her actions and Judge Moniz had proven beyond reasonable doubt her actions over the following weeks leading up to Roy's death were purposeful. However, on the other hand, possessing severe depression and being on strong antidepressants at a young age can lead to poor choices and thus should be considered when deciding the defendant's sentence.
Born on September 12, 1995, in the small town of Mattapoisett, Massachusetts, Conrad Roy III would become the victim in one of the most controversial and covered cases of modern times, the texting suicide case that divided opinions globally, posing the question, are text messages grounds for indictment of an involuntary manslaughter offense? It was July 13th, 2014, when Mr. Roy was found dead inside his pickup truck outside the car park of a Kmart, as a result of suicide by carbon monoxide poisoning. The important things to know about Mr. Roy in regards to this case pertain to his mental state and well-being leading up to his death. The defense team of Michelle Carter argued that Mr. Roy ought to be held legally responsible for his own death. This was due to various factors that were impacting his mental health and well-being, including past instances of domestic abuse at the hands of Mr. Roy's father, as well as acknowledgement of Mr. Roy's past suicide attempts and the fact that he was taking serious antidepressant medications, which may have fueled his suicidal thoughts and mental illnesses. It was well known that Mr. Roy was a troubled young man who dealt with depression as well as social anxiety for many years before his untimely death. adding to the complexity of determining whether the actions of Michelle Carter, which were primarily digital, could actually constitute legal accountability for the death of Mr. Roy. It was on June 16, 2017, when the presiding judge over the Commonwealth vs. Michelle Carter case, Lawrence Monez, determined that Miss Carter was in fact guilty of involuntary manslaughter and the death of Conrad Roy. Miss Carter was convicted and sentenced to 2.5 years imprisonment with a probationary period of 5 years for her crimes of suicidal encouragement to Conrad Roy. However, Miss Carter would not begin to serve her sentence until the completion of the appeal against her conviction. It was not until February of 2019 when the Massachusetts State Supreme Court denied her appeal, and Miss Carter would actually begin to serve her sentence, which was reduced to only 15 months, with the rest of her original sentence being suspended. In another twist, Michelle Carter would in fact be released on the 23rd of January 2020, having served only 11 months of her 15-month sentence per good behaviour, thereby beginning her 5-year probationary period. Although the reasoning for a verdict is not legally required, Judge Monez felt it was necessary given the nature of the case, with the decision to convict Ms. Carter coming down to two significant points. Firstly, referencing the chain of causation of events that led to the death of Mr. Roy, stating that had Mr. Roy not exited his pickup truck and called Ms. Carter, he would not have broken the chain of causation. But upon exiting, he did in fact break the chain, and that Miss Carter established herself within the chain once she ordered Mr. Roy to get back in the truck, despite knowing the obvious and immediate risks. Monez also identified how Miss Carter had created this duty of care to Mr. Roy herself, which she breached when she told Mr. Roy to re-enter his truck, knowing the state of the vehicle not being fit for human life.
The case of Commonwealth v. Michelle Carter gathered a myriad of national and international news headlines, and eventually its own TV series titled I Love You, Now Die. Few manslaughter cases ever get this sort of coverage, and the significance of this case lies in its implications on society and the changing nature of the criminal justice system. The case's divisiveness manifested itself in a whirlwind of articles and opinion pieces across the world, from pre-trial to the events in court and to the final sentencing. Academics, scholars, and even beauty magazines had their say through every possible form of media. Some took it as an opportunity to express their disgust at Carter's vile actions, while others came to her defense. And when the final decision was handed down, the media lit up a storm. One quote that stood out was from the New York Times by Matthew Siegel, legal director of the ACLU of Massachusetts. Mr. Roy's death is a terrible tragedy, but it is not a reason to stretch the boundaries of our criminal laws or abandon the protections of our Constitution. End quote. One thing is for sure, future law students will definitely have a lot of material regarding this case thanks to the media. Unlike most controversial or important events nowadays, a documentary was made, titled I Love You, Now Die. The critically acclaimed HBO documentary followed the case from the beginning, with access and interviews with members from both of the parties involved, including family members, attorneys, expert witnesses, and police detectives. Massachusetts is one of only 8 states in the US that does not have coerced suicide listed as a crime. At the time of trial, a piece of legislation called Conrad's Law was being proposed, which would make intentional coercion or encouragement towards suicide a crime. But it wasn't until the death of Utola in 2019, a Boston College student who experienced similar coercion to Conrad, was this bill filed. As of now, the bill has not yet been passed into law. It is fair to say that the criminal justice systems across the world are playing catch-up with technology and how it affects society. The case of Commonwealth v. Carter is a milestone, as it creates a precedent within the American justice system. This is important as there is no consensus right now among the courts as to whether verbal facilitation of suicide is completely protected by the First Amendment. And as a sign of the ill-equipped nature of the American justice system, one of the 2 cases Judge Monez used in the Commonwealth v. Carter case was a 1816 conviction of a prisoner by the name of George for encouraging his inmate who was on death row to commit suicide. The town was outraged that George had to bribe them of a much anticipated public execution, so they decided to execute him instead. The case of Commonwealth v. Carter has shone light on the unfortunate uses of technology, with the American Academy of Psychiatry and Law demanding that legislatures should address and clarify seemingly debatable and vague laws pertaining to facilitated suicide. The case of Commonwealth v. Carter was troubling on many fronts. Conrad had suffered an abusive childhood filled with depression and anxiety that resulted in several failed suicide attempts. He found comfort in Michelle, who herself was taking psychiatric prescription medication, and while initially she helped him steer away from suicide, she eventually changed her mind. That fateful night when Conrad left his death trap of a car and called Michelle, in that moment Michelle had a duty of care. She decided to coerce and pressure him into going back inside and finishing himself off, committing criminal negligence. On behalf of the team, I'd like to thank you for watching, and I hope you have a lovely week.